In this video, we are looking at group policy object. At the end of the video, we should be able to explain what group policy objects are, explain the benefits of group policy object, navigate the group policy management console, and then differentiate between user and computer configurations. And then we should also be able to create and configure new group policy objects and link this group policy object to the organizational unit and then the domain if required. And then we should also be able to understand what we mean by GPO precedence, that's group policy precedence, and then configure certain advanced features in group policy like inheritance, blocking, and security filtering. And then finally, we will learn how to verify and troubleshoot group policy object. So what is group policy object? Group policy object is a feature in the Windows Server environment that enables administrators to control and enforce settings across computers and users in the Active Directory domain. Group policy is a powerful administrative tool that you can use to enforce various types of settings to a large number of computers and users in the Active Directory domain. For example, examples of such settings that you can use group policy object to enforce are security configurations, software deployment, folder redirection, and other aspects of user and computer configurations. All these can be managed centrally through group policy object. So it's a very powerful administrative tool that enables us to centrally enforce settings on computers and users that are in the Active Directory domain. That is a brief explanation of what group policy objects are. The benefits of group policy objects are that it helps us in terms of centrally managing settings across users and computers in the Active Directory domain. It allows administrators to define and apply configurations from central locations, and then it simplifies the administration process and ensures consistent settings across the network. It also helps us in terms of consistency and standardization of settings across our Active Directory domain. Group policy objects enable administrators to enforce and standardize configurations and policies across the network. This consistency helps ensure that all computers and users adhere to organizational standards, security policies, and best practices. Another advantage of group policy object is also time and cost savings. In terms of the time you use to configure settings on individual machines, assuming without having group policy and then you want to apply certain settings on maybe 200 computers, then you would have to visit these 200 computers one at a time to configure these settings on them. But with group policy object, administrators can now automate the configuration and management of the network resources, and then it saves time and it reduces administrative overheads. They can push out configurations and software deployment to multiple computers simultaneously, and then it eliminates the need for manual configuration on each machine. So instead of visiting each machine to do a common setting like installing a software, now you can use group policy object to do it at once on all the computers instead of visiting these computers one by one. So it saves time and it saves cost as well. And then it enhances security as well. GPOs play a crucial role in strengthening network security. Administrators can enforce security settings, restrict access to resources, and configure auditing and logging policies. This helps protect against unauthorized access, data breaches, and then security vulnerabilities. It also helps in terms of granular control of the network. Group policy objects offer granular control over policy settings. Administrators can target specific users, groups, or computers, let's say, and then apply different policies based on criteria such as their location, their department, the kind of role that they offer in the domain environment or in the workplace, for instance. And then this flexibility will allow for customized policy enforcement and ensure that policies are tailored to specific needs. So we can use group policies to ensure that each individual or each computer or user within the domain-based environment have been taken care of in terms of their specific needs for the settings that they require to work in the domain-based environment. And you can use group policy to enforce some of these settings. And then the last one that we will talk about is compliance and auditing. In terms of compliance and auditing, GPOs help organizations meet regulatory compliance requirements by enforcing policies and configurations that align with industry standards. For example, GPOs also provide auditing capabilities, allowing administrators to track policy changes. So you can track the changes in the policies that you create, monitor the user activities in these policies, and then generate reports for compliance purposes. Now let's go into our server to see how we can create group policy object. To create a group policy object, you launch your server manager, and then at the top right side, you locate tools. You click on tools, and then in the drop down that appears, you locate group policy management, and you click on that. The new window that has opened is what we call the group policy management console. So let's expand it, and then we'll get to familiarize ourselves with the group policy management console. So if we come to, I'm sure for the new console that you open, if you've never opened this before, you will have something like this with your forest and then your domain name here. So if you have multiple domains, you may see them here. So what you have to do is just drop down, and then you see your domains in here, and then you drop down again, and then you see your virtual class domain or whatever domain that you've created, and then other domains that you have if you are managing other domains from here. So with this, we just have one domain. So I will drop down and check our domain here. You will notice that in the previous video on organizational unit and Active Directory object, we created certain organizational units, and these are the organizational units we find in the group policy management console as well. We created them in the Active Directory users and computer section, but they also appear in the group policy management console. And then here we have group policy object. This folder called the group policy object is where all the group policies that you create in the future will be stored. If we drop down this folder, it has two default group policies already created. You did not do this. It was created by default when you promoted a server to become a domain controller. we have what we call the default domain controller policy. This policy applies to domain controllers inside your forest. And then this is the organizational unit that this policy is applied on. We will later look at how we can apply a policy on an organizational unit. So this domain controller organizational unit we find here is where this default domain controllers policy is applied on. So you can see that we have default domain controllers policy here, and then we also have default domain controllers policy here. But the difference is that this is a shortcut. You can see that the image here is a shortcut of this. So the actual policy resides inside the group policy object folder, but it has been applied to the domain controllers organizational unit. So if you see the shortcut sign on any policy, it means that is where the policy is being applied. And then we also have the default domain policy. This policy applies to everyone inside the domain. So you can see that it was applied right to the domain. We'll later look at what starter group policy objects are. But let's go ahead to create a group policy object. So to create a group policy object, there are a number of ways you can do that. I'll just click on the group policy object folder here, and then after right clicking, I'll click on new to start the process of creating a new group policy object. Now, what should be the name of our group policy object? What do we have in mind? We have defined group policy object as a feature in Windows Server that helps us to enforce settings on computers and users across the Active Directory domain. So before you create a group policy, you should have a plan in mind. You just don't create group policies. You should have a plan on what settings are you trying to enforce and what are you trying to do. So with this, let's say we want to restrict control panel access. So this is the name of our new group policy: restrict control panel access. It means we are trying to restrict control panel access. Now, who we apply this on is another thing that we will have to consider. So we'll click on OK. And then now our policy has been created. If we come here, we can see restrict control panel access, and then GPO status is enabled. Let's go inside this policy that we have created and then actually provide the details of what we want to do. So we have just given it a name. Now, let me close this and then come back here. What I did was to right click on the new group policy object I've created, a new GPO, restrict control panel access, and then I clicked on edit. So this is where we are now coming to choose the configuration that we want to be applied there. Now for the new window that appears, you will see what we call the computer configuration and then the user configuration. This is very important. And then you would have to understand what this is, because this will help you determine where you are applying the group policy you are creating and then who will be affected. If you are not able to understand this, then you will apply the group policy anyhow, and then it will affect people in your users on your Active Directory or even computers in your Active Directory. So you have to understand this. We have computer configuration and then user configuration. let's first look at computer configuration. Computer configurations are settings that you apply to the physical computers in your domain environment. So if you have 12 computers, you can decide which computers you want to apply this group policy object on using computer configuration. They affect the physical machines. So regardless of who will sit behind that computer to log on, that configuration will affect them. So these configurations applies to the physical devices on your network. You have to take note of that. And then it is applied during startup, that is before the user logs on. So as the computer is booting up, the group policy object you have applied using computer configurations will affect the physical computers. Irrespective of who uses it, they will be affected. Common configurations or settings that we apply using computer configurations are security settings like password policies, and then account lockout, software installation, shutting down, and then starting up script, and then Windows settings like firewall and network configurations. So that is the meaning of what we call computer configurations. They affect the physical computers in your domain environment. And then we have what we call user configurations. The user configuration, these are settings that applies to users regardless of which computer they log into. So these the user configurations are applied on the user account, but computer configurations are applied on computer account. So how do they apply? They are processed at user logon. That is when a user is logging on from a PC that is on the domain, then the user configuration will apply to that user. So we apply these configurations on the users on the network. Here again, you will choose which user you want to apply these configurations on. So that part is planning. You plan on which user you want to apply the configurations on, which computer you want to apply the computer configurations on. But the meaning is that if you choose user configuration, you are applying it on a group of users or a certain user. That is the meaning. Common uses of user configuration are folder redirection, user-specific software deployment, and then administrative templates like restricting control panel, which will be our example for today. So that is the difference between user configuration and computer configuration. In summary, computer configurations are applied at startup. User configurations are applied during the user logon. It is machine-wide, that is applied only on machines, and then user configurations are applied on users. Computer configurations affect all users using that device, and then user configurations affect the users, and then it follows that user across multiple devices. So even when the user logs out from a particular computer and goes to the next computer that's on the domain environment, because that configuration is tied to that user, it will affect the user also everywhere. So that is the difference between computer object and then computer configuration, and then user configuration. So with this knowledge, now we know what we are doing in this window. We have computer configuration and user configuration. So now our restrict access to control panel. What do we want to do? Are we restricting access to a computer, or we are restricting access to a certain user? If you restrict access to a computer, then it means anybody who will sit behind that computer to use, they will not be able to access the control panel, whoever they are. And then if you restrict access on a specific user or a group of users, it means those users, even when they change machines and go and sit behind other machines in the domain environment, they will still not be able to access control panel because that configuration is tied to them. And this decision is made by the administrator. That is you. You determine what you want to do on the network, whether you are choosing a computer configuration or a user configuration. That being said, if you look at computer configuration and user configuration, you can see that they are almost looking alike, but they are not the same. If we expand preferences, and then we go to Windows setup, and then we expand policies here, and then expand administrative template. You are trying to expand some of the things that are in here. If we expand the policies, administrative template, and then we expand Windows settings, and then all these. We want to go into control panel settings. So even if you don't know where to go, if you expand these folders, that's from start. If you expand these folders, you have a fair idea of where you want to go. Or as a new administrator, you would have to visit Google to find out the steps to do something. So for instance, if you want to disable the network interface card of a machine, one, you should know that because you are applying it on the machine, it's a computer configuration. Or if you want to disable the desktop background, someone from changing the desktop background, a specific user, you should know that this one is on the user. So you apply the configuration of the user. Now, to restrict access to the control panel, we would like to apply it on a user. And then we'll choose the user that we want to apply on. We'll apply this on a user that I have called Kelly Mills. We will restrict control panel access, but we will not apply it directly on the user. We'll apply it on the organizational unit that Kelly Mills finds himself, so that it will affect everybody within that organizational unit. That is what we will do. So here, under computer configuration, I was trying to show you that they look alike. All the settings are very similar, but they don't do the same thing. If we click on control panel here, as I've done, we can see that under computer configuration, these are the settings that can be done in computer configuration. When we come to user configuration and then we scroll down to administrative template, and then we come to control panel here, you can see that they have more settings than what we found in the control panel under computer configuration. So there are subtle differences within the settings, what you can do with computer configuration and what you can do with user configuration. They are not the same. You cannot do the same things with them. There are differences in there, so you have to take note. And then if you want to do something, if you want to enforce a particular setting, you can read more on Google to know how best you can apply these settings. There are more than 3,500 settings that you can apply using group policy objects. So it's not something that you will know immediately when you begin. It takes time. Anything that you want to do, you Google it and then you research on it, how best you can apply it, and then you can come back to your server and apply it. And as time goes on, you master it and then become perfect in this. So let's go ahead and then go back to our group policy management console and find where we can find our user Kelly Mills. So here, Kelly Mills, I think, was in the IT department. We cannot see him here, but if we go to tools and then Active Directory users and computers, we should find exactly where we placed Kelly-Mills. So here, if we come to IT, yes. So Kelly-Mills is under IT department, and then they are members of the IT department group. So if you apply the group policy on IT department, it will affect Kelly-Mills and then John Smith. So we'll go back into our group policy management console, and now we know where we will apply our group policy object. So let's come back into our group policy management editor, and then now we will configure the setting to restrict the control panel access, and then afterwards we will apply it on the IT organizational unit. So as I have said earlier, we are applying it on the IT department organizational unit, and this is where we can find our user Kelly-Mills and the other users that are inside the organizational unit. So if we apply that policy on the organizational unit, everybody within the organizational unit will be affected. That is what we want to do. We do not want the IT department organizational unit to be able to access the control panel settings. So because we are applying it on the users, we would have to come to user configuration. If you didn't know where it was, just expand everything, and then you have a fair idea. Other than that, you can Google and see what you are doing. And then you click on the control panel. If we're applying it on the computers on the network, then it means we have grouped those computers inside an organizational unit where we are also apply them on. But now we are applying it on users. So we come to the user configuration, we click on the control panel, and then this window has the information about the control panel settings we can apply in group policy object. Now our policy is just simple. It's found here. It's saying that prohibit access to control panel and PC settings. This is what we need. So if this is not what you need, and then you wanted any other settings regarding control panel, they are all found here. You can look at them here. Hide settings tab, disable display control panel. All these are all settings regarding control panel. So what we want to do mainly is to prohibit access to control panel. They shouldn't get access at all. So we'll double click on this setting, and then here the window that appears, let me enlarge it. If you come to the help here, it tells you what this setting does exactly. It says that this setting prevents control.exe and system settings.exe, the program files for control panel and PC settings, from starting. So if you don't have an idea about what you are applying, you can read about what that setting would do in this help area. If we come here, we can see that our group policy object has not yet been configured. We just created it, but we have not configured it. So it's not configured. And then we have another option called enabled or disabled. And then you can write some comment, what you want to say about it, so that in the near future, when you come back, you will know that, okay, this policy is about this optional. So this is what we will do. And then here is telling you that how it's supported on which kind of computers, at least Windows 2000. So from Windows 7, 8, 11, 10, all can support this settings. So what we have to do now is to click on enabled. If you click on enabled, it means you have enabled this setting in the group policy object that you have created. And then you come to apply, and then you click OK. So we have just gone through the process of creating a group policy object. We have created a group policy object. Now, after creating the group policy object, you have to apply the group policy object. So we can see here that prohibit access to control panel and pixie settings has been enabled. The state is enabled. We have enabled it. Now we have to apply it on where we want to apply it. This is where it takes planning, because you can't just go and apply it anywhere on your network. You have to have a plan on where you want to apply it. Other than that, you cause disruptions on the network. People who have to have access have been blocked, and people who don't want to have access will have access. That will be a problem. So you plan before you implement group policy object. So we'll come to our group policy management console here. We said we wanted to apply it on the IT department organizational unit. So this is what we will do. But before that, if we wanted to apply it on the domain, then we'll click on the domain, right click it, and then we'll link it on the domain. If you wanted to apply it on the domain, the implication of applying it on the domain is that it will affect everybody within the domain. So you have to know this as well, because the domain contains everyone. So if you apply it on the domain, it's affecting everybody within the domain. If you apply it on the HR department OU, it will affect everybody within this HR department OU. If you apply it anywhere in an organizational unit, it will affect that. If you had multiple, let's say if you had child organizational unit within an organizational unit, then it means you could have, just like sales department. And the sales department, we have sales managers and sales officers. If you apply it on sales department, it will affect both users in sales managers and sales officers. But if you choose to apply it here on sales managers, it will only affect sales managers. It won't affect sales officers. So you should learn how to plan and then apply these policies as and when they are required. That is part of granular control, trying to make a detailed configuration for specific users on the network, and GPOs helps us to do that. So we will go back and apply it on our IT department, where we can find the users that we want to block. What you do is you right click and then you go to link an existing GPO, because we have already created a GPO. Let's go back again. The group policy that we created, we know that we can find it here. Okay, so if we right click, if we click on it, these are the information that we have here. If you go to details, it is saying that it is enabled, and then it's giving us the time and everything that we created. If you come to settings, it's now generating the report for us. When you come down here, computer configuration, no settings has been defined. And then user configuration as well, we have not defined any user that it has to be applied on. So this helps us to know certain information about our group policy object that we have created. Now let's go back and then link it to the IT department organizational unit. So you go to link an existing GPO, and then these are all the GPOs that we have in our domain. If you had more, then all will appear here, and then you choose which one you are applying to that organizational unit that you have chosen. So we are applying restrict control panel access. So we'll click on that and then click on OK. And when we did that, you can see here now that we have a shortcut image and then we have restrict control panel access. The GPO we created is here, but now we can see that it has also appeared here, which means it is being applied on the IT department organizational unit. And then we can see the information here about it. We'll later get to know the enforced, what it means. So let's come back here. Now, if you click on the control panel, the restrict control panel access, you can see here that the location that is being applied is the IT department organizational unit. And then it's affecting all authenticated users within that organizational unit. We'll get to know what security filtering is and how we can work around it to remove some of the users for them not to be affected. We'll look at that later. So let's go into our user, log on with our user and test if that user has truly been restricted from accessing the control panel. We'll log into our user. So we are logged in now as Kelly Mills, who is a member of the IT department organizational unit. We will search for control panel. And then we'll click on control panel to see if he will have access. And then this is the response that we have, that this operation has been cancelled due to restrictions in effect on this computer. Please contact your system administrator. So because of the group policy object to restrict access to control panel, now Kelly Mills doesn't have access. And anyone who is also a member of that organizational unit will not have access. So this is how we configure and apply group policy object on organizational unit. As I said earlier, if you applied it on the domain, then everybody will be restricted. But if you choose specific organizational units, then those inside those organizational units will be affected. Let's go back into our server. And then we learned one way of creating a group policy and then applying it. Now, we can also have another way. For instance, if you want to create a new group policy, this time applying it on, let's say, only the sales offices. We want to restrict the sales offices from inserting USB drives into their computers. That's the domain computers in their offices. Now, what we have to do first is that we would have to add those computers to the sales organizational unit. So if we come to the scenario again, is to restrict sales users, sales officers from inserting removable drives into the computers that they use on the domain. If you come to Active Directory users and computers, this time because you want to apply it on the computers that these sales officers use. Now, if you come to computers, you see all the computers that are in your domain, and then you select the ones that the sales officers use, and then you drag them into this is the sales officers organizational unit. So you can drag all the computers into the sales officers organizational unit here. That's how you do it here. And then when you do that, those computers become part of the sales officer organizational unit. Or you could have even created a new organizational unit and then name it sales computers or something. And then after you have done that, you come to your group policy management console. Instead of coming here to create a new policy before you link it, you can just go straight forward and create a GPO here and link it here. So you create and link at the same time. So device, removable device restriction. And immediately you create it, it's linked here. So we didn't go through the first process where we created it before we linked it. Now we create it and then we link it. So with this too, you have to now go into the configuration here and then go and find the configuration that allows you to block computers from having removable devices like USB and external hard disks and the rest. We are applying it on computers. So in this case, it will be in computer configuration. So with this, I know where to find it. If you don't know where to find it, you can just Google it and then you will have the steps to where to go. If you come to policies and then administrative template here, if you click on administrative template and then you click on systems. So let's click on systems here and let's maximize this window. You should look for device installation. So if you double click on the device installation, here you have another folder called device installation restriction. If you double click on that, you should look for prevent installation of removable devices. So this is it, prevent installation of removable devices. You double click that and then you enable. If you don't know what it does exactly, you can read about it here to have a fair idea of what it will do. And it's saying that this is supported on at least Windows Vista. So all the user computers that are on your domain should be either Windows Vista or above. If it's below, then this will not work. So that is the information we have here. So we enable it, we go to apply, and then we click on OK. And as we have done that, then it means it has been applied on our sales officers organizational unit. Where do we have it? We have it here. Yes. So we can find it here. Yes. So this time we created and linked it at the same time. So here we will assume that there are sales computers because we applied it on we use computer configuration. There has to be computers object inside the sales officers organizational unit for the group policy to take effect because it is affecting computers. So in this case, anyone who sits behind this computer and then insert a pen drive or external hard disk or any other USB drive, they will have restrictions because we have applied this group policy on those computers or on that particular computer that belongs to this sales officers organizational unit. So this is how we apply group policy object. Now, perhaps maybe in the future you don't want this policy to be applied again on the sales officers. You can just click it and then you can delete it. notice that if we delete this, we deleted it from being applied to the sales officers organizational unit. But under group policy, even though we created it here, it is found under group policy object. So all our group policy objects are found here. We can still see it here. Removable device restriction is here. We deleted it from being applied on sales officers, but we still have it here. So we can come back in the future again, and then we can relink it. Now let's look at how group policy objects are processed. There are basically 4 types of group policy objects that we can configure. The first is the local group policy object. Now, the local group policy object is the group policy object we can configure on a standalone computer. If I talk of a standalone computer, I'm talking about a computer that has not joined the domain, an individual computer that has not joined the domain. You can configure group policy object on that individual computer. And even if it has joined the domain, there is still a way to configure a local GPU on that computer. This time you are not configuring it on the server to affect the computer. You are configuring it locally on that computer. That is what we call the local GPO. Let me show you how this is done. If you come to your client computer and then you press the Windows button plus the R button, and then here you type the command gpedit.msc, and then you click OK. It will open the local group policy local editor for you. But because this computer has joined the domain controller is restricting it from accessing that window. If your computer has not joined the domain, if you have a computer that has not joined the domain, you will have the full complement of that window. If I close this, the window will still open, but we will not have everything in there. So you can see it here. We should have had user computer configuration and then user configuration and see all the settings just like we see in the server. But this time it is local group policy editor. We can configure group policies locally on this computer, and it will affect only this computer. With or without the domain, you can do this, but my domain controller is blocking it because of the settings we've applied. So that is what we call the local group policy editor. And then the next is the site level group policy object. Now the site level group policy object basically is the group policy object we apply to different locations. For instance, if you have a domain-based environment that has different locations, normally for companies, maybe your company is scattered across different locations, you can configure group policy object according to these locations, such that if a user or a computer is in location A, this group policy should affect it. The other user in location B, this group policy should affect it. So if a user moves from location A to location B and it joins that location, then that group policy in that location will affect it. So as they move to different locations, they'll be affected by different group policies that are in those locations. For example, and previously, normally it was used to configure printing services in group policy, such that if a computer or a user is in location A, then a group policy is set that they should have their default printer to be in the location A. And then if they move to location B, then when they come to location B, the group policy in location B will affect them to use the printer in location B as their default printer. But even now, it's really done, because if you go to the group policy preferences, we have a more efficient way of setting group policies for printers. So basically, That was what site level GPOs were used to do, to configure settings in different locations so that those in these locations will be affected. And then now we have the domain level group policy object. This is the group policy object that is applied at the domain level, and then it affects everyone within that domain, both computers and users, and even the domain controller. I think we have looked at what that is. Let's go back and see it again. So our domain here is the virtualclass.com, and you can see we just have one group policy object that has been linked to our domain called the default domain policy. This is the default domain policy when the group policy object configuration was done, when the server was promoted to become a domain controller. We have not added any other. So this default domain policy is applied at the domain level. So it will affect every computer, every user within the domain. For example, if we go ahead to link this removable device restriction, this is a group policy we created previously. If we want to link it to the domain level, you just come to link an existing GPU, and then you choose the removable device restriction. And then now it is linked to the domain. Immediately we link it to the domain, this will affect everything under the domain, the users and all the computers in all the organizational units that we have under our domain. So that is what we call the domain level GPU. And lastly, we have the organizational unit level GPU, which we have looked at all this while. This is the GPU we apply to directly to an organizational unit. So we can see here, for instance, the IT department organizational unit. We have applied restrict control panel access directly to the IT organizational unit. And then we have also applied what we call the wallpaper restriction group policy object to the IT department organizational unit. So these two policies are directly applied to this organizational unit. You can create as many group policy object that you want and link it to the organizational unit or the domain. So let's look at now how they are processed in that order. In processing the group policy object, we say that as you move down this order, the group policy object becomes strongest when there is a conflict. Let me explain when there is a conflict. Assuming there is a local GPU created on your machine that says that the user or the computer cannot do something, it's a no. And then there is another group policy at the site level that is giving permission to that same user or computer to do the same thing that the local said it can do. This time, the site level GPU will take precedence, that it will take effect over the local GPU. So the site level GPU is more stronger than the local GPU if they are having the same settings but they are conflicting. One is saying no and one is saying yes to the same thing. The site will win. In the same way, if site is saying no to a thing and then the domain level GPU is saying yes to the same thing, then the domain level will win over site and over local. In the same way, if organizational level GPU is saying yes to something and then domain level is saying no to the same thing, then the organizational unit GPU will win. So as you go down this order, the group policy object becomes the most strongest in terms of if they have the same settings, but one is saying the other thing and the other is saying another thing, then this precedence applies. I hope this is understandable. Let's use a typical example. For instance, if the local GPO is saying that users can have certain level of access to the control panel, it doesn't block every access. It blocks some aspect of the control panel. And then the site level GPO is saying that block every aspect of the control panel. This time, the site level GPO will win because it has precedence over the local GPO. In the same way, if the site level GPO is saying you can have certain level of access to maybe the network settings of a computer, and then there is a configuration at the domain level, which all the users and computers are there, and it is saying that you cannot have access to the network settings of computers at all, then the domain level GPO will win. So it applies when the group policy that have been set are the same, but one is saying the other and the other is also saying different thing. Then in this case, the precedence applies. So if a domain level GPU is saying that you can have access to the power option settings on a computer, and then the organizational unit GPO is saying that you cannot have any access to the power settings of a computer, all the users and computers within the organizational unit will not have access, even though the domain is granting them access. But because we have applied organizational unit GPO at the organizational unit level, it becomes the strongest. So this is how it works. As you apply the group policy object at the organizational unit level, they are the most strongest. So for example, if there is a setting in this default domain policy that is saying that all computers in the domain can have a certain access to the control panel, they are not entirely blocked. Maybe they can have access to certain parts of the control panel, but not all. But if you come to the IT department, we have restricted complete access to the control panel. In this case, the organizational level GPO that we have applied here will take precedence over whatever has been configured in the domain policy. So that is what we mean by the processing order. As you go down the order that we just saw in the slide, it becomes strongest if they have the same settings and they are conflicting. If the settings are not conflicting, then all the settings will work as how they have been configured. But if they are conflicting, then now you should know that the one at the organizational unit level will have effect over any other settings that is in the domain or in site or in the local. And it's very important for you to know this so that you know how you can apply your group policies and where you apply them. Very important. Now, in our interface, this is how we can see it at work. You see that at the domain level, we have two policies that have been applied at the domain level. We have the default domain policy, and then we have the removable device restriction. These are policies that are affecting everyone within the domain. If you come here, you can see link order. The link order is describing the precedence. Which one is more powerful than the other in terms of if they have the same settings and one is saying no and one is saying yes, which one should we listen to? Now, the one with the least link order number is the most powerful. So if the default domain policy here at the domain level is saying yes to something, and then the removable device restriction is also saying no to the same thing, then the default domain policy will win because it has the lowest link order. So we can have as many group policy objects here, up to 10, 12, whatever number that you can configure. As the link order increases, they become weaker if they have the same settings with conflicting GPOs. So here, what you have to just know is that the least the link order, the stronger the GPO if they have the same settings, but they are conflicting. If we come to the IT department, we can see here that we have group policy object, link group policy object. So these are the group policy objects that are directly linked to the organizational unit. There are two, and we can see them here. And the order is 1 for restrict control panel access and 2 for wallpaper restriction. So assuming there are settings within these two that are the same, but one is saying yes and one is saying no to the same thing, now the restrict control panel access will win. But if the settings are not conflicting, then all the settings will work. So that is how it works. Now, if you click on this GPO, you can change the order. If you click on the down arrow here, you can move the link down so that wallpaper becomes number 1 and restrict control panel access becomes number 2. So now, if they are conflicting settings, the wallpaper restriction will win because you have moved the restrict control panel to number 2. So these are how you can control the precedence of group policy object in your domain-based environment. If you come to group policy inheritance, now you will see all the group policies that are affecting your organizational unit. You can see here that the first two are the directly linked group policy objects at the organizational unit level. So they have higher precedence over the last two. The last two were derived, they were inherited from the domain. So they were not directly applied to our organizational units. They were applied at the domain level, but they are affecting the organizational unit called IT department because that is also under our domain. So you can see that the precedence for the ones from the domain level are lower. So that is why we are saying that organizational level GPOs have higher precedence over domain level GPOs. So the ones directly applied have the highest precedence, followed by the ones from the domain and site and then local.